The Israeli Supreme Court has weighed in on the issue of Palestinians being evicted from their homes in East Jerusalem in the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah. Israeli settlers have been attempting to push them out of their homes in order to take over those properties. But this case in the Israeli Supreme Court has been lagging following the violence that broke out a few months ago. Now, the court has weighed in, and unfortunately, it is not positive. The Israeli Supreme Court offered a deal to 4 of the Palestinian families facing eviction. They could stay in their homes for now if they begin paying rent to a Jewish settlement organization, which claims ownership over the disputed properties. The Palestinian families rejected the deal, insisting they were the legal owners. And by the way, they're not the only ones insisting that they're the legal owners. The international community, with the exception of the United States, also says that they are the legal owners. In fact, the international community argues that pushing these Palestinians out of their homes could amount to a possible war crime. The United Nations has described the planned evictions as a possible war crime. So the families understandably have rejected that offer because the idea of paying rent for a property that you own, especially paying rent to people who don't own that property, is crazy, which is absolutely crazy.
Okay, so there's a ton of issues here. First of all, if you think, well, maybe it's rational. I mean, some of these guys have deeds from 80 years ago or 120 years ago or so. Let me defeat that in a couple of different ways. One is, well, if you go back 120 years, the Ottoman Empire owned everything. So, okay, now you all owe me rent. You see how absurd that is? Of course it's absurd, right? And so, but now even more to the point here, wait a minute, Palestinians had homes in Israel, in what is now Israel proper, right? And they were driven out in 1948 and through some of the other wars. So if Israel is going to apply this principle uniformly, then they would accept the Palestinian deeds and go, okay, now all these Israelis, you now owe them rent. You owe the Palestinians rent. By the way, you owe them back rent too. And by the way, it's actually their house. Now, are they gonna do that? No, they're not gonna do that. They're only doing it to the Palestinians. That's called bigotry, flat out. So in this case, they say if you're a Jewish Israeli, because the Arab Israelis, I don't believe, are in anybody else's homes. They're in their own homes. They're the ones that stayed, right? So in this particular case, if you're a Jewish Israeli, you don't have to pay rent. You never have to return the homes that you took. Just take it, who cares, just steal it, right? That's one way of framing it. But if you're a Palestinian, no, that's it. It's actually our property and you owe me rent. Now, does anybody think that's fair? No, the whole rest of the world agrees that's not fair except for Israel and America, led by right-wing governments going, and yes, Joe Biden's government is a right-wing government that supports the right-wing government of Israel and says, I don't care what's fair. I don't care about the Palestinians and their damn rights. I want to do bigotry. You're Muslim, give me rent. You're Jewish Israeli, you're free to go. And so,
I mean, it kind of reminds me. It kind of reminds me of what cartels do with businesses in Latin American countries, right? They show up and it's like, oh, you got a cute little business going down here that you own, that you work hard on. Go ahead and give me a cut of that every single month. I mean, it's ridiculous. And again, the international community clearly disagrees with this. It's just the United States and the Israeli government that thinks it makes sense to push Palestinians out of the homes that they own. And in this case, the Israeli court is arguing that they should pay rent to the very individuals who are trying to push them out of their homes. Now, Mohammed El-Kurd is one of the activists on the ground. He's gone viral thanks to the cable news interviews that he's done on this very issue. And he spoke to Democracy Now! About the recent offer by the Israeli Supreme Court. Let's hear what he has to say.
The court hearing at the Israeli Colonial Supreme Court was like any other hearing we've had, except for the massive amount of press outside the court hall. Essentially what happened is that we were in a courtroom that was speaking only in Hebrew, and we do not speak Hebrew. Most of us that live in Sheikh Jarrah do not speak Hebrew, so we were there playing a game of broken telephone, trying to decipher what is being said. But we understood that the Supreme Court is evading its responsibilities. The court is really aware of the international media pressure. They even explicitly made a remark about the media pressure, and so they wanted to reach a quote-unquote diplomatic solution, and so they're evading their responsibilities, pressuring us to reach a settlement with the settlers instead. Now, the way this is being reported or the way this is being conveyed might sound like a good deal, but what's happening here is that we would be living at the mercy of settlers, paying rent to live in our own homes, and dealing with all kinds of arbitrary policies. I imagine, I personally don't love the idea of having a landlord, let alone having a settler landlord.
I mean, I can't imagine that offer by the Israeli Supreme Court sounded good to anyone. Right?
No, but the reason he says that, Anna, is because the press, as always, has been awful. Almost every outlet has framed it as Palestinians reject offer.
Well, let's go to the BBC headline, because I think this is a perfect example of the framing that you're referring to. The BBC headline on this story was, Sheikh Jarrah, Palestinians reject offer to end evictions threat. Putting the onus on the Palestinians, right? Like, they're just being unreasonable. They're rejecting this offer, and what could we do? They had to be evicted. Now, it hasn't come to that yet, but it's this kind of framing kind of primes people to think that way. And that's why it's so incredibly irresponsible to frame it this way.
Okay, so look, what is counterframing, which is also factual. Israel offers up war crimes as a solution for housing. Well, that's true. The international community think it's a war crime to try to take these people's homes or to charge them rent. By the way, another point that should be pointed out there is, yeah, if you're at the mercy of the settlers are the most extreme, and they want to drive these people from East Jerusalem so they can annex East Jerusalem. They care less about the particular house or the rent than they do about the occupation. And so you think they're going to be reasonable about the rent? You think they're going to come and fix the plumbing? No, they're not going to do any of that. They're obviously going to drive them from their homes because they're settlers and that's what they want to do. That's their stated mission objective. They're not hiding it, right? So this is an incredibly fair headline would be that Israel makes absurd offer that would further occupation. And so instead they make it seem like Israel offered something and the Palestinians rejected it as usual. Can you believe it? They don't want to pay rent in their own home, and they don't want to do a settlement with the settlers who want to do ethnic cleansing of them. Outrageous, the Palestinians.
Yeah, it makes it seem as though the Palestinian families aren't doing what's necessary to avoid eviction. And so that, again, that framing is just, it's irresponsible, and it spreads this thought process that's unfortunately incredibly unfair to the Palestinian families, who again are dealing with settlers who are trying to push them out of the homes that they have the right to live in peacefully. Did you have?
Yeah, I just want to say one last thing about this. Look, the only reason I brought up religion in this particular case is because by their own logic, the Israelis would be legalizing bigotry in this case, right? And so can Jews and Muslims work together? Yeah, Young Turks were started by Jews and Muslims. We could definitely work together. And of course that's happened all across America, and Jews were heroic in standing up for Muslims during the Muslim ban in the Trump era here in America. But in this case, you should not be in favor of legalized bigotry. And by the way, it doesn't help the Israeli cause because then there's the right of return. So by your own logic, the Palestinians would have every right to all that land within Israel proper. And when you go to peace settlements, if you ever do, you couldn't say, oh no, you have no right to return. Well, you just charge them rent because of that same exact philosophy.
Right.
So it is counterproductive in every way imaginable. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.